about your name cards in just one shape of length out. You guys can sit back down. I ran out of time to do your Q&A, but we may have you come up during the Q&A of the honor winners. I'm sure there are questions that everyone wants to ask. Oh, is there no room for you? No room for me. I'm sorry. It was not perfect.
There's another chair right here.
We're scooting down. Switch down.
Okay.
And somewhere.
Let's just share.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Somewhere is my notebook and the question was for you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's all me. Yep. All right. Sorry, we'll try to get to questions at the end, and I know everyone likes to ask questions here, so sorry to cut you off from Rich and Carla. Okay, so I would like to introduce wonderful honor authors we have, and one publisher. So we have Jacqueline Jules and Eugenia Neighbor, who are the author and illustrator of Drop by Drop. You can applaud. Oh, sure. You can applaud. Okay. And then we can applaud. We have Madeline Rosenberg, and Madeline has a writing partner in this book, Wendy Sheng, who is here in spirit, in Mexico, in reality, who wishes she could be here, and they are the author of This Is Just a Test. We have Tamar Stein, who is the author of 6 Day Hero. Okay, I don't want to get anything wrong. We have Susan Krowitz, who is the author of Viva Rose, and I'll say this again tonight, but Susan is also the winner of the manuscript Cindy Taylor Award a few years ago, and so we are really thrilled this book has also won an honor award. So, we have Arthur Levine, who is the publisher of Almost Autumn by Marion Caron. And we have Catherine Locke, who is the author of The Girl in the Woods. Okay, and we have my questions somewhere. Okay. All right. So the first thing is to ask you what we just heard from Rich and Antonio and Alan and Carla is your elevator pitch version of how you came to make these books. And Arthur, we know how you came to acquire and translate this book. Okay, Jackie, you can start. Oh, yes, do you mind one microphone?
Well, in June of 2015, I was moderator at a AJL panel, and as part of that, actually Madeline was on that panel as well. And afterwards, there was a very spirited discussion of what kind of books do we need in Jewish children's books. And many of the librarians said we want more Bible stories, we want more Torah and the Talmudic heroes. Yeah, okay, I'm behind the book. All right. And so I was inspired, and I went home and I started researching, and I came across the story of Rabbi Akiva, who learned to read at age 40. And he was encouraged by his wife, Rachel, to study. And but Rabbi Akiva, he questioned his abilities. He didn't think that he could learn to read at age 40. And he thought he said, what if my mind is like a stone, that I can't learn anything? And there's this wonderful poetic image in the story about him, the legend about him, is that he watched how water softened stone. And at that moment, he realizes that he could learn little by little the way water softens stone. And I was touched by this story as a poet and also as a teacher, because so many kids see themselves, when they're struggling to read, they see themselves as maybe not capable of learning. And to have this hero who at age 40, this Jewish hero who at age 40 learned to read and learned that he could do more than he thought he could do. And so that was how I came to write the story.
And how did you come to illustrate it or find your way into that experience?
Well, Jackie and I met yesterday in person, the first time, and we talked about how an illustrator brings a different layer of meaning to a story. And I knew about Rabbi Akiva for many years actually, but when I read the story, I thought about it as a love story, and I really wanted to take, through my illustrations, to take that angle. And I thought how much she must have been in love with this person to sacrifice so much, and how their love had grown over the years, and how they were able to sustain that relationship. And I wanted to visually show that them growing older and still having that spark through pictures. And that what really drove me with the book.
Sorry about that cord.
No, I'm sorry.
So I wrote This Is Just a Test with Wendy Shang, who was one of my best friends. And I guess that's where the book really started for us, was with our friendship. We hung out a lot. We were about the same age. We had kids that were the same age. And so we spent a lot of time talking and playing bad tennis, because the sort of tennis that we played is the sort of tennis that requires a disclaimer. And so we decided that we could multitask our friendship in a way, I guess, and spend even more time together if we were writing a book together. And the way we kind of came up with the subject matter for the book was we wanted both of our cultural identities to be in there. And one of the things that we had kind of bonded over the years is that we had both grown up sort of as onlys. I don't know if any of you know anything about Fairfax, Virginia. Right now it's very diverse. But when Wendy was growing up there, she was the only Chinese American kid in her elementary school. And when I was growing up in Southwest Virginia, there were not many Jewish kids in Southwest Virginia either. And so together we created the character of David Dawei Horowitz, who thinks that he is the only Chinese American Jewish kid in Virginia in the 1980s, and possibly, in the entire world. And we set it in the 1980s because when you work with a partner, it's good to have a landscape, some sort of touchstone that you both know really well. And for us, it ended up being the time period that we grew up, and then the story just sort of took off from there with all of David's family and the conflicts in his life and things like that.
And the grandmothers.
And the grandmothers, yes.
Crucial.
So my book began with a phone call from my mom, and so when I talk to schools, I always say, this is why you always pick up the phone when your mom calls. And she says, I saw the rabbi last night, and he says he has nothing to assign his fifth graders about Israel, and didn't you write a book about Israel, and couldn't he assign that to his fifth graders? So that book was my first book. which actually was a Sydney Taylor notable book, and is like mostly authors really want people to read their books, but it's like 100% not appropriate for fifth graders. And my mother was like, no, bad, no, like don't do that. But she follows it up in the phone call with me, and she's like, you should write something. And I'm like, Mom, like I'm fine. I don't need you to tell me what to write. But there was something about like that idea, like it just stuck with me because we're like in a period of like a very vibrant time of Jewish publishing, and I'm like, Rabbi is just like not knowing where to look. So I was like, I'm going to just solve this problem, and I'm going to go on Amazon, and I'm going to just pull some titles for my mom to give to the rabbi, and we'll just move along. And so I go on Amazon, right, solves all of our problems, and I was kind of dumbfounded because it turns out the rabbi was correct, and there really wasn't anything about modern-day Israel for that age group. And so I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of interesting. And I grew up in Israel, and my parents, both fought in that, were served in the IDF, and I have a sort of real love for Israel, and I never really thought about, I don't know, it never really occurred to me to write about it. So I'm still kind of thinking about it and wondering, what should I do? Should I write something? Should it be me that should I be the one that sort of solves this problem or writes a book about this? And I was like, well, let me just brush up on my modern Israeli history. I don't fully know it, so I was like, I'll just start at the beginning. I'm just gonna review my facts. So I'm gonna just throw up there, the Israeli War of Independence. And again, when I give school talks and I say, have you guys ever written a research paper? And they all say yes. And I say, what is the website that your teachers say not to use as a resource? Wikipedia. And I was like, here's why. Because when I entered the Israeli War of Independence, and I'm not doing research, it's just for me, I just need Wikipedia is 97% accurate, right? But here's where you find that 3% that isn't accurate. When you put in, it's still to this day, the Israeli War of Independence, and your first link on Google is going to be a link to Wikipedia, and you click on that link, there is no link in Wikipedia for the Israeli War of Independence. You can only find the 1948 Palestine War or the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. So that name is like completely doesn't exist. And that was really kind of that moment for me where I started to feel really concerned, because kids who are curious, who are hearing about whatever in the news, and they're going to want to go on their own and find out a little bit more information, are really going to feel that Wikipedia is a very trusted source. Because when you want to know the average rainfall in Brazil in April, Wikipedia will tell you the correct amount. And they're going to really believe it that when they enter in, the 1948 conflict, they're not going to know what it's called. And I don't think I need to review with you like why names are so important, but I will just super quickly. If it's called the 1948 Israeli War of Independence, we know why it was fought. We know what was at stake. We know who won. And if you know just a little bit of history, so you know there was a UN mandate, you know who probably didn't start that war. I will now get off my soapbox, but if it's called the 1948 Palestine War, all of that information is suddenly up for debate. It's no longer clear. Why was it fought? Who fought for it? Who started it? So I ended up deciding to write about the Six-Day War for several reasons. First of all, it did just mark its 50th anniversary last year, and so I knew the timing of it could come up at that same time. It's also the war that started the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and however that situation is going to be solved one day, that is the war that started that situation. And I think it's really important to know the history. I think it's important to know how things got started.
My book got started with family legends of a relative who left his Russian immigrant family who settled in San Antonio, Texas, to ride with Pancho Villa. So we were told these stories about this relative, my cousins and I, from childhood. Abe played chess on horseback. He used to come visit the relatives in Brooklyn wearing full cowboy regalia and then pool shark because you looked like some guy that just fell off a horse and clean up all the money. So didn't know if this was true or not true, although I found a serape in my great aunt Dee Dee's room that was very out of place. So as adults, my sister lived in Texas for a while, and she went to San Antonio and looked in the microfiche, Googling Abraham's name and Pancho Villa. And sure enough, she found an article about him that started with the sentence, "Some lives are so colorful, they're more fictional than true." And for me, it was like, well, yeah, okay. I will take that as a challenge. But it took quite a long time to get it into a form that seemed to work, to screen it through his younger sister's, Rose, also a person's point of view as a 13-year-old, was the way that worked for me. And it took a long time to get it into book form. But it's been a fun ride.
Just too wide a room for me to sit and try to talk to you all. So I did not write this book. This is Mariana Corin's book, Almost Autumn. And the way it came about is that when I go to the Bologna Children's Book Fair every year, I try to find the best authors from different countries to bring to the attention of American English language speaking kids. And I have a number of criteria for that. It needs to be a great book. It needs to be an author who has, I feel, something to say to young American kids. And I want the book to gain something from the fact that it was written where it was written. If I could just as easily say, I can find an American author who can write this story, then I probably am not going to take the expense and time to have it translated. I translated Daniela Carmi's Samir and Yonatan, which is a story about an Israeli boy and a Palestinian boy who have a friendship for that reason, because I wanted to hear an Israeli author speaking about a story she was imagining outside her door. This is a little bit further back than outside Mariana Corin's door. It's about, it takes place in World War II. And what struck me is that for all that I complain about, oh, please, not another book, don't send me another book about the Holocaust, I keep finding things that I did not know about it, stories I didn't know. I personally just really had no idea that the Holocaust happened in Norway. I mean, I just think of Scandinavia as, general kind of nice, safe place, and things like that just don't happen there. But I mean, that has no basis in reality. I'm talking about my own ignorance and idealizations. So the fact that it did happen and was, extended its horror there, and I didn't know about it, just struck me as incredible, and I really wanted to read it. And then when we read it, Mariana Corin is a beautiful writer, and she has all those other qualities, and so she makes the story, come alive with the love between these characters and the mystery, and it's fast paced, and she does a great job telling the story. So that's where that one came from.
The Girl with the Red Balloon is an unusual story in that it really takes place in 3 timelines. It starts in present day, and then Ellie accidentally time travels by a magical red balloon, as you do. You haven't done that. Huh. So she goes back to 1988 East Berlin, and how she gets there is related to how her grandfather escaped a death camp in 1942. And it took me a really long time to get to 3 points of view and 3 timelines. Originally the book opened with Ellie landing in East Berlin, but you didn't really know anything about her because you hadn't seen her in her own present timeline. And Benno, her grandfather, didn't have his own point of view and his own timeline in the first draft. The book came to me because in 2006 I traveled back to Ukraine, and I was the first person from my family to return to Ukraine since everybody left. And those who didn't leave before 1926 died in the Holocaust at Baba Yar and in various massacres that happened in Western Ukraine. And when I returned, my grandfather, who had been born in the United States, said to me, "How could you go back to a place that treated us so terribly?" And I was really fascinated with how he phrased that, because it happened to him too, in the way that he said that. And I went back to Ukraine, and I love Ukraine. Ukraine does not love me back. I went to Lviv, and which is formerly Lvov, and there were swastikas on almost every wall that I passed. I was very, very uncomfortable when I was there. I did not tell people that I was Jewish at all. We went to a synagogue. I didn't tell anyone there I was Jewish. I was very, very uncomfortable in Ukraine, but I still felt a very deep attachment to Ukraine. I didn't think I could write a story about Ukraine because it felt too close. So Ellie's relationship with her grandfather is very similar to my relationship with my grandfather. Her struggles with how she feels like she's at home in Berlin, when Berlin treated her grandfather so terribly, are my struggles. And that became, I knew I wanted to write a story about that feeling, and it took me a long time to find the right book for it. And then I was driving to work. I had a really long commute. It was an hour and a half each way, and 99 Red Balloons came on the radio. And in my head, I saw a girl going over a wall with a red balloon. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Where is she going? Why is she going there? And by the time I got to work, I knew that I was setting it in Berlin. I knew that it was the Berlin Wall she was going over. And I knew that that was the story, that puzzle piece, that feeling of how could someone feel attached to a place that had treated their predecessors and their ancestors and their families so terribly. That's where that puzzle piece, that story also fit. So don't tell my boss. He definitely knows this because I say it in at least every event. I wrote the first chapter at work. That was the first thing I did that day. And the first line of the book is now the last line of chapter 1. And that stayed the same, even though I threw out most of the first draft. So I approached it in that direction. It just took me a long time to realize I needed all 3 people to be telling this story, not just Ellie.
I'm going to come down here and ask my questions so we can go all the way back down. Okay, since we don't have very much time, and there's so much more I want to ask these amazing authors, I will just settle on this last double question, which is, as we won't stop talking about, this is the 50th anniversary of the Taylor Book, and what really impressed me is I was told, oh, well, you know, when you call and tell everyone that they won, they might not know what they won, and they might need to find out what that is, and they're going to Google it, and that was just not the case. Everyone was ecstatic, and they knew exactly what it was, particularly Katie. I'm looking at Katie because she had quite a reaction to the Sidney Taylor in particular, and Madeline, and many of you. So my question is twofold. One is, what does the Sidney Taylor Award for All of Kind Family mean to you? And you don't have to answer the second part, but if you have a favorite winner from our 50-year history, what would that be?
So I have always used the Sidney Taylor Awards since I discovered them probably like 10 or 11 years ago. I've used them to guide my own reading because I didn't realize that there were Jewish books when I was growing up. So they always guided my own reading, and this was quite the honor. I called Susan back when I was at a Starbucks because that's where I got her email. And then I was crying in the Starbucks, and strangers were staring at me. but I seemed to be happy, so they were very confused. And then after I hung up, like people were coming up and they were like, "You seem happy, but are you okay?" And I got to tell a Starbucks full of strangers that my book had gotten an honor, and then like everyone clapped for me. It was a really cool feeling, but it was in like Hockessin, Delaware, which is like a nowhere place, and it was a really cool thing. And every time I go back to that Starbucks, I actually think about that moment. But I've read through I've almost read through all of the lists from the winners and honors this year. So the Librarian of Auschwitz was incredible, and I like cried several times. And right now, that is like the standout book in my head because it was just a really emotional, powerful book, and I really enjoyed the read. I'm really glad that it won the award.
Well, so the very first book that I wrote that was published was called All the Lights in the Night, and that won a Sidney Taylor honor. And I just thought, wow, this is great. And in fact, it's the only book of mine that ever won kind of an honor. So that was the height of my career, actually. And it did mean a lot to me to have what was essentially my grandfather's story be presented and be introduced to a Jewish audience. And I think that's one of the things as a publisher that means a lot to me is if I publish a book that will have a Jewish audience, it means a lot to me to have any kind of support and letting people know about it. So that's very, very valuable. And my favorite Sidney Taylor honoree is Ketzel, who composed. It's so beautiful.
I guess when I thought about this story and thought about creating a book from it, somehow I discovered that there was such a thing as a Sidney Taylor Award, and that made me think, well, here's a place where books like this can be published and noted, and it gave me hope and courage to go the distance. This is my first novel. And then when I found out there was a manuscript award, yahoo, there was. What does it mean to me? The support is just everything from the manuscript award, which pulled the book out of a really trough of doldrums dropped by an agent for reasons beyond anybody's control, and then me just, despairing. Picked me up, picked the book up, got me a lovely agent, wonderful publishing house, and all the good things. And so for it also to have won an honor and find a place in the bigger world is beyond amazing. And I'm just crazy grateful for this whole program and all its manifestations. My favorite Sidney Taylor winner, I think, is Joseph Had a Little Overcoat by Sims Tabak. Yeah. Oh my gosh, what a delightful book. And I have to say, a writers group friend of mine worked for him in his greeting card company, which was located near where I live in Hudson Valley. But I hear he was a wonderful man. But that book, it just jumps out and sings for you, and it's wonderful.
Sorry about the microphone. Yeah, I mean, obviously, just to echo everybody, I think that, writers, you sort of work alone, and you live in your head, and sometimes your head is a nice place to be in, and sometimes it's not a nice place to be in. And then you send your baby out into the world, and some reviewers will call your baby ugly, and and so then to have librarians, right? Which is I think authors and librarians, we're just kindred souls to have them sort of say, no, this is great. And there's expression, there's something about a man in uniform. There's something about a book with a medal. I think you just instantly that book kind of looks at you a little little bit. And so I'm so excited. My book has a medal. Like, it's so pretty. So no, it
Matches the decor of the book, right?
yeah, no. I mean, obviously what it stands for, just like a uniform. It's what it stands for. But it's so special. So I mean, I was just thrilled, as Susan will be able to tell you when she told me. And in terms of like what one of my favorites, I mean, of course, like you get put on the spot, but the thing that I think there's a difference when you pick up a book and it already has the medal on it versus reading a book that later gets the medal. And I think when you pick up the book and it already has the medal, you kind of expect it to be amazing. And you're like, yeah, of course this book got a medal. But I read The Hired Girl before I got a medal. And then I felt like, I completely agreed with the committee that it was just like this fantastic book. So I'm going to.
So I grew up in the aforementioned Southwest Virginia, where there were not many Jewish people, and I really wanted some Jewish friends. And my mom gave me all of a kind family, and then I had 5 of them. And so anyway, that book was my first mirror, because when you look for yourselves in books and you're reading along, and then it's Sunday afternoon or morning and everybody's in church and you're like, oh, okay, not me. And so it was the first time that I was able to see myself in a book, and I thought these kids are exactly like me, even though it was 1910 and not. I grew up obviously a little later than that, in different circumstances with different observances, but we had that connection. And so having a book with Sydney Taylor's name on it is really important to me, so thank you.
If only Roger Sutton were here to
Yes.
have heard you say that.
Yes.
Hopefully, Heidi, that's recorded
Yeah.
for Roger.
So I've learned about Sydney Taylor a couple of years ago when I won a notable book for the Wren and the Sparrow. And so I was really excited to be upgraded.
That's what you said when I called.
Yeah.
And
And speaking of Ukraine not loving you back, I'm from Kiev. This is where I grew up. And I cannot imagine even working on a Jewish book like this in Ukraine. I cannot imagine winning anything for a Jewish book in any category, let alone in a special category for Jewish books. So this is really an amazing surprise and honor, and I'm so thrilled to have that and to be able to add this to my life, really. So thank you.
Oh, we both forgot to say our favorites.
I don't know enough books to really.
So Madeline, do you have a favorite?
I was going to go with I Dissent.
Local author.
Well, as somebody who's also a librarian and who worked as a Jewish librarian, I did collection development, and I would buy the books off of the Sydney Taylor list. And I know that when you win so I know that when a book is on the award list, it's more likely to be in a library, and that's a huge thrill for me. And also, 25 years ago, when I first started writing books for children, I was like Akiva. I had doubts that I would ever find a publisher for my first book, and to now receive my 4th silver medal from the Sydney Taylor Award is just, I never thought that would happen, so it's totally. So thank you.
Do you have a favorite book?
Well, it was Tamar's, so
I was going to say it's The Hired Girl, wasn't it?
It's The Hired Girl, which I also read before it got the. I read so many of the books on the list. But my first one was The Hired Girl.
So I don't know if our panel realizes, but a lot of you mentioned current book in the last few years, and there are committee members here from pretty much every book that you named. Not Joseph, I don't know, but maybe there is. Oh, okay. So I think
that's how far back our memories go.
it was really special.
In this room.
It was really special to hear you say that. So I'm going to commit an unpardonable AJL sin because I've gotten to the session ending. So if you have a really important, urgent question, all these amazing authors will be signing at the tables, and you can come up to them individually as opposed to having a group Q&A, and I am so sorry about that, and I hope you will all forgive me. But they will, I'm sure, all be happy to answer your questions, and I do hope you support them and buy their amazing books. And in 15, we're going to do autographing, and then in 15 minutes, we're going to do the committee session and hear what the committee found. So thank you all for making this so fun.